Good morning, everybody. So good to have you here today on all three of our Parker Hill campuses for week number 2 in this series called How to Wreck Your Life. And the idea behind the series is simply this, that God not only cares about what happens to us when we die, He also cares very deeply about how we live. And as a loving Heavenly Father, God wants to help us make decisions that lead us to a place of blessing and not to a place of pain. And so throughout this series, we're talking about 6 very common ways that people tend to wreck their lives so that we can recognize them and avoid them ourselves. And today, we're going to be talking about one of the biggest factors that will determine whether or not you wreck your life. And that is the people that you choose to surround yourself with, the influences in your life, the relationships in your life, or the lack of relationships in your life. And as a way of introducing this message, I want to tell you about a book that I came across years ago. It's a great little kid's book called The All Better Book. And the author, in writing this book, went about it in a very creative way. What she did was she posed some questions to a group of elementary school kids and then recorded their answers, and then their answers became the subject matter of this book. And one of the questions in the book was this one: with billions of people in the world, someone should be able to figure out a system where no one is lonely. What would you suggest? Let me tell you a few of their answers. A little girl by the name of Kalani said this: people should find lonely people and ask their name and address. Then ask people who aren't lonely their name and address. When you have an even amount of each, assign lonely and not lonely people together in the newspaper. And I'm sure she's going to be an accountant when she grows up. This next little guy, his name is Max, he said this: make food that talks to you when you eat. For instance, it would say, how are you doing? And what happened to you today? I don't know, I might lose my appetite if I had to eat food that spoke to me. Then Matt, age 8, he said this: we could get people a pet or a husband or a wife and take them places. Pet, husband, wife, it's all the same. One more, this is Brian, and this one's actually kind of sad. He said this: sing a song, stomp your feet, read a book. Sometimes I think no one loves me, so I do one of these. With billions of people in the world, someone should be able to figure out a system where no one is lonely. Well, I got good news for you today. God has already figured that out. See, Scripture tells us that when you become a follower of Christ, you are not only invited into a relationship with your Heavenly Father, you are also invited into relationship with your brothers and sisters who are on this journey with you. And if you're a follower of Jesus, His desire for us is not that we live in isolation, but that we live in community, that we do life together. Because when you choose to live in isolation, you will wreck your life. In fact, I think one of the reasons why we see so many wrecked lives around us in our culture is because so many people in our culture live lives of loneliness and isolation and disconnectedness. And statistics tell us that the number of lonely, disconnected people in our culture is increasing, and it's increasing rapidly. Back in 1985, there was a study conducted by Duke University, and in this study, 10% of the people they surveyed agreed with this statement: I have no one with whom I can discuss personal concerns. Now, that's bad enough, but in 2004, they conducted the same survey again, but this time not 10%, but 19 years later, in 2004, 25% of Americans surveyed said, I have no one with whom I can discuss personal concerns. 1 out of every 4 Americans. And study after study shows that we, in our culture, are becoming more and more disconnected, more and more lonely, more and more isolated. And that, my friends, is dangerous. And so today, my goal is very simple. I'm going to tell you my goal right up front. My goal is to use all of my persuasive abilities and to teach you from Scripture how important it is for you to take a step toward building relationships with people who can push you in the right direction, who can travel with you and help you arrive at the place that God is calling you to be spiritually. And then at the end of this message, we'll give you a very simple next step that you can take to help that happen. So let me tell you really the big idea, the bottom line of this message right up front. In case you fall asleep at some point, you'll know everything I'm trying to communicate in the next 30 minutes. It is simply this: show me your friends, and I'll show you your future. I really believe this is true. The people that you choose to surround yourself with, they will have an incredible impact on the outcome of your life. Having the right kinds of friendships will help you to live the right kind of life. And the flip side of that is true. Having the wrong friends will keep you from living the right life, or having no friends at all. Now, during this series, as we talked about last week, we're going to be learning from one book of the Bible, the book of Proverbs. And Proverbs is a collection of brief sayings about how life works from God's perspective. A proverb is just a short, pithy saying. It's a soundbite, and it's all about here's how life works. And the theme of the book of Proverbs is wisdom. It's all about wisdom. The word wisdom comes up 55 times in this book of the Bible, including chapter 2, verse 11. I love this verse. It says this: wise choices will watch over you. Understanding will keep you safe. In other words, when you make wise choices, when you live with wisdom, guess what you're not going to do? You're not going to wreck your life. Now, if you were here last week, you know that I also threw out a challenge to you. If you don't already read the Bible on a consistent daily basis, the book of Proverbs is a great place to start. You can just read one chapter a day. There are 31 chapters in Proverbs. And just read one chapter a day that coincides with that day's date. And within a month, you will either read through most of or the entire book of Proverbs. And if you do that month after month after month, you're going to discover that your perspective on life is starting to change. One of our leaders, one of our overseers, has been doing this for 17 years. He is one of the wisest men I've ever met. So today, we're going to see what the book of Proverbs has to say about friendships, because one of the major themes in this book of the Bible is the theme of relationships. And if we're going to live wisely, and if we're going to avoid wrecking our lives, there are a couple of things we need to do. Number one, we need the right kind of friends. And then number two, we need the right kind of friendships with those friends. But here's where we start. We've got to look at, within our circle of influence, within our circle of relationships, what kind of friends do we have? Now, Proverbs over and over in many, many different verses talks about the importance of making really wise choices in our closest friends. But probably the one verse that sums this up the best is Proverbs 13:12, which says this: he who walks with the wise grows wise, but a companion of fools suffers harm. Now, even if you didn't know that that was in the Bible, you know that's true, don't you? Because you've seen that in your life, you've seen that in the lives of other people. I mean, probably every single one of us can look back on our lives, and we can look at seasons when we've made some really poor decisions. I can think of times when I broke my parents' hearts, that I was walking with people who were not wise. And conversely, we can all look back at times in our lives when things were going really well, when we accomplished some great things and had some great moments. And probably without exception, those times happen when we are surrounding ourselves with wise people. Because when you walk with the wise, you absorb their wisdom. If you hang around with idiots, you're going to become a little bit more of an idiot yourself. And so number one, we need the right kinds of friends. But then number two, we need this as well. We need the right kinds of friendships. Because if you want to avoid wrecking your life, if you want to live well, you not only need the right kinds of people around you, you need the right friends, but you also need to have the right kind of friendships. In other words, you have to have authentic friendships. Friendships that go beneath the surface of life. Friendships that will help you become the person that God is calling you to be. So, in the next few minutes, I want to talk about 4 different levels of friendship that you find in the book of Proverbs. And for each type of friendship, I just want to give you one image. And I want you to do a little bit of self-assessment in the next few minutes. Think about your own relational world. Think about your friendships. And see which one of these images is the best representation of your relational world. Okay, here's the first one. For some of you, when it comes to relationships, this is how you feel. It kind of feels like you're isolated, and there's a whole world out there going on around you, but you just don't feel like you're part of it. I mean, you may not even be physically alone. You may be part of a family, but just emotionally, you feel like you're alone. Relationally, it's like you've built walls around yourself. Maybe isolation is the best word, and this is the best image to describe your relational world right now. And as I said a few minutes ago, a larger and larger percentage of people in our culture are living this kind of very isolated existence. So many people feel so disconnected and so lonely. And there are a number of reasons for that. I think one of the reasons is very simply the advance of technology. Like the very things that have made our lives so comfortable have also made us more and more lonely. I read a book about this a few years ago about how technology has affected relationships. I mean, simple things like air conditioning. I mean, think about it. Years ago, when you wanted to cool off in the evening, where did you go? Well, you'd go outside and you would sit on the front porch and drink some lemonade and play some checkers and talk to the neighbors. But then air conditioning came along, and now if you want to stay cool, you go indoors. Or something as simple as a garage door opener. I mean, those things are so handy. You just pull up to your bat cave, and you push the button and pull your car in, and then it closes behind you. And you don't even have to get out of your car. You never even have to risk seeing your neighbor. I mean, technology has affected relationships. Or think about the answering machine. Now, if you're young, you don't even know what that is. But if you're like near my age, you can probably remember when the answering machine was invented. And think about it. What did we do before the invention of the answering machine? If we wanted to figure out who was on the other end of the line, do you know what we had to do? We had to answer the phone. I mean, that's crazy, isn't it? But then the answering machine came along, and then you could screen the calls. You could just listen and, decide if you wanted to call them back or not. Nowadays, we have voicemail and we have text messaging. And what's really interesting is that among younger people, one of the growing fears that they have, I'm not making this up, is talking on the phone. And what people sometimes will do today is they'll let a phone call go to voicemail, and then they'll text to return the message that they heard on the voicemail, because you can control your text message, and conversation is a little bit more risky. Or think about, even the newest technology like smartphones and iPads and laptop computers. It is now possible, because I see this in my family, it's possible for your entire family to all be sitting in the same room and for every single one to be in their own little world, immersed in the glow of their own screen. And we have now this individualized kind of entertainment that is so common in our culture. And as a culture, we are quickly becoming what I call Techno Hermits. And so we live in this culture where technology itself, along with many, many other factors, seems to be making us more and more isolated and disconnected and lonely. But listen to what Proverbs says about the person who chooses to live in isolation. It says this: a man who isolates himself seeks his own desire. In other words, he doesn't want to have to deal with other people, just wants to have to satisfy his own desires and his own whims. But then it says this: he rages against all wise judgment. In other words, if you live in relational isolation, you are not wise. You're foolish. If you want to wreck your life, Proverbs says you just isolate yourself. Now, every once in a while, when I talk about this concept, I'll get some pushback from Christians. There are Christians who will say, you know what, and usually this is based on personality because they're introverts, and they'll say, you know what, I really don't need anyone else. I've got God, and it's just me and God. And that sounds very spiritual. The problem is that it's absolutely wrong, and it goes against everything the Bible says about what it means to be a follower of Christ. And we use this phrase about having a personal relationship with God, which is fine, but there's something even better than just having a personal relationship with God. It's having a shared relationship with other believers on this journey. In fact, throughout the Bible, in the New Testament, there are 47 commands that incorporate this two-word phrase, one another, like spur one another on, encourage one another, serve one another, bear with one another, love one another, admonish one another. That's just 6 examples. But see, you can't do those things if you live in isolation. If this is you, there's no way to love one another, encourage one another, bear with one another, admonish one another. You cannot do that in isolation. So if this is the picture of your relational world and your friendships, you got a little bit of work to do. Okay? Maybe that's not you, however. Maybe you have relationships with people, but maybe this next picture would describe the reality of your relationships. This is a makeup bag. This is a makeup kit. I know this because I have 5 daughters, 5 sisters, 1 wife, and 2 daughters. Okay, so I'm very familiar with makeup. In fact, when I was growing up, my sisters would sometimes use this phrase. They wouldn't say, I'm going to put on my makeup. They would say, I'm going to put on my face. See, makeup is what you use when you want to improve your appearance, when you want to cover up things that you don't want other people to notice. And for some of you who are women, I hope this doesn't apply to you if you're a man, but some of you who are women, you don't even want to go out in public and let anybody see you without your makeup on. And here's my point. Not only is there literal makeup, I think a lot of people wear relational makeup as well. In other words, when we enter into relationships, we want to cover up our blemishes and cover up our deficiencies and our hurts. We don't want anybody to really know who we are completely, and so we kind of put on this superficial persona. And we have these relationships where all we talk about is weather and the sports and the weather and the latest Hollywood scandal, but never really get beyond that in terms of conversation and opening up our hearts. And if that would describe your relational world, you need to hear what Proverbs says in chapter 18 and verse 24. Fascinating verse. It says, a man or woman of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. And there's an interesting contrast here. Maybe you see it. Many companions or a friend, a close friend. Many companions or a friend. You can be a person who has many companions, many of those superficial relationships, and still your life may come to ruin. You still may wreck your life with many companions. But what's implied here is that probably won't happen if you have a friend who sticks closer than a brother. And the idea here is that we need more than just many companions. We need true friends. Now, this verse really, really resonates, I think, in our culture in a way that it never has before, because we live today in a culture where technology has made it possible for us to have many, many, many companions without really having a true friend. And one example of that is simply the explosion of social media. Now, let me say right up front, very clearly that I'm not against social media. There are a lot of great uses for it. We use it all the time as a church. It's one of our primary ways of communicating with people, a lot of great benefits. But we all have to agree that social media is redefining the way that we approach relationships, right? I mean, for example, I can guarantee you that years ago, you didn't call every person you've ever known to tell them what you're having for breakfast. Okay, you didn't do that. But you can do that now, and you can show a picture of your oatmeal and all of that. But what experts are saying is that we are becoming less and less concerned about face-to-face relationships and more concerned about the image that we portray on social media. And so what happens is, something happens in your life or you want to communicate something that you're feeling, and so you go on Facebook or Instagram and you take a picture of yourself, and if you don't like it, the lighting's not quite right, you take another picture of yourself and get the best picture of yourself, and then you put a filter on it to make it look a little bit better, and then you frame it, and then you write just the perfect quote to go with it, and then you upload it, and then you keep going back and you keep checking to see how many people liked it, and you're like, oh man, 5 minutes and I've got 7 likes already. And so we think that's relationship when sometimes it's just image management. Now, again, I'm not against social media. I think it's a great way to stay in touch, but I think it's a great supplement to relationship. but it can never be a replacement for a relationship. And in the culture that we live in today, we have so many people who go through life with 400 Facebook friends, but nobody that they can sit down with across the table and open up their heart to. So there's two levels of relationship. Let me talk to you about a third level, a deeper level of relationship that's reflected here in Proverbs chapter 17. It says, "A friend loves at all times, but a brother is born for adversity." Now, there's a contrast here that I find very, very fascinating. And what Solomon is saying here is that sometimes you can have a friendship that is even more valuable and powerful than a family relationship. He says a brother is born for adversity. And this is just describing the way that families typically work. Families will rally around one another in a time of crisis, because there's a blood tie, there's a sense of obligation there, a sense of care there. But then there are friends who will love us at all times, not just in the adversity, not just in the crisis. And what Solomon is saying here is that it's possible to have friends who are even closer to us in some ways than family, which is a profound statement, because in Hebrew culture, the family was so important. It was just incredibly important to them in that culture. And so this is describing a level of relationship where you have a friend, where you have a relationship with someone who loves you in the good times and in the bad times. He loves you, she loves you when things are going really well, and even when things are going really, really bad. Let me give you an image and see if you have any relationships that might fit with this kind of picture. This is a gas can. I've talked about this before. It's what I call the empty tank test. And the empty tank test is simply this. Imagine that you're driving home. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. It's a very cold night. And you're about 30 miles away from home. And your car runs out of gas. And you don't have AAA. And so you've got to call someone on your cell phone to get up at 1 o'clock in the morning on a cold night and drive 30 miles to bring you some gasoline for your car. Here's the question. How many people do you know who you could call who would be happy to do that for you? I mean, those people are your real friends. But let me give you one more level of relationship, one more level of friendship, and that is when you have relationships with a few people where your life is to them an open book, where they know you well, and they know how to encourage you, and they know when to speak truth to you, and they can see when you're starting to go off the rails a little bit, and they can call you back, and they can help carry your burden when you have a life that's opened up to other people because you've built that kind of relationship. There are a couple of verses here in Proverbs chapter 27 that describe this so well. Verse 5 says, "Better is open rebuke than hidden love." And then verse 6, "Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses." Now, I don't know about you, but I always prefer kisses over wounds. But the point here is this, that when you have somebody who really loves you, there may be times when they, as your friend, will say something that may feel like a wound, but it's like the wound of a surgeon. It's intended to heal you. But your enemies, they don't care about you enough to tell you the truth. They just flatter you. They just multiply kisses. And see, this is the opposite of what a lot of people think. Sometimes what people think is this, that the people who say hurtful things to me and who call me to a higher standard, well, they can't really be my friends, but the people who flatter me, who multiply kisses, they are my true friends. But according to the book of Proverbs, that's exactly the opposite. That a deep friendship, an authentic friend, is someone who is willing to gently and carefully tell me about the sin in my life. A real friend is someone who's not afraid to say, "Listen, I love you, and because I love you, I got to tell you about something in your life that's really making me nervous." And then you go on to verse 9 in Proverbs 27, and it says this, "Perfume and incense bring joy to the heart, and the pleasantness of one's friend springs from his earnest counsel." In other words, one of the greatest blessings in life is to have a relationship with a friend who knows how to give you earnest, honest, wise counsel. People who know you well, know the decisions you're facing, and even if they don't know the wise decision that you need to make, they will search the scriptures and they will pray with you and help you find that answer because they love you that much. And again, sometimes that earnest counsel means being willing to step back and say, "I love you," And because I love you, I got to tell you this. You know what? I have had and have a few friends like that over the years, and that is an incredible, incredible blessing. So let me ask you to stop right here and do a little bit of assessment of your relational world. I mean, what kind of friendships do you have? Do you live in isolation most of the time? Are your relationships primarily superficial? Or have you moved to the point where you have relationships with people who are very, very loyal to you, or even better, do you have those kinds of relationships where your life has become an open book? Because here's why. You show me your friends, and I'll show you your future. You know, sociologists talk about three kinds of poverty. There is, first of all, material poverty. And we all know what that means. It's when you don't have much money or many material possessions. But then there's a second type of poverty, spiritual poverty. And you can have material riches, and yet you can be spiritually poor because you have no relationship with God and you have no eternal hope. And so spiritually you're bankrupt, even though materially speaking you're very, very wealthy. But then there's a third kind of poverty that many people don't even recognize or think about very much, and that is relational poverty, where you go through life with very few deep and meaningful relationships. And let me say this, that you will be spiritually poor if you try to be a follower of Christ and you are relationally poor. And one of the things that will stand in the way of both spiritual wealth and relational wealth is material wealth. It will. And I'll tell you one of the places where I see this so clearly, and you can discover this for yourself if you go on one of our global outreach journeys. But I've been to Haiti and I've been to Kenya. And let me tell you what happens when you go to a third world country like that. The first thing that you feel and that you sense is just an amazement at the material poverty that you see all around you. And you say, how do people live like this with no electricity, no running water, none of the common luxuries that we have? But then, you know, what I've discovered is you spend a few days there in that culture, and then you find that you're beginning to get actually a little bit jealous of them, and you wonder why. And eventually it clicks with you. And you understand that even though they may not have much in terms of material riches, they have incredible spiritual wealth and relational wealth because they love God authentically and they worship Him wholeheartedly and they love each other deeply. But here's the thing. I don't want you to have to go to a third world country and live there to experience relational wealth. And I don't think you have to. I believe that can be possible for us. It isn't easy. It takes time. It takes effort. It takes intentionality. There's no drive-through where you can pull up and say, you know, I'll take one friend, supersize him. There's no website, friendship.com, where you can go on and buy a friend and have him shipped to your house. It doesn't happen that way. You have to make it a priority of your life. And I'm going to talk about one way here in closing that may put you on a path toward having the kinds of relationships that will enrich your life and help you to be the person that God is calling you to be, and that will keep you from wrecking your life. And this is one application of the message. It's not the only application today, but it is a very, very important one. And the application is this. I want to encourage every single one of you to move beyond a row and get into a circle. And what I mean by that is this, to move beyond just a Sunday morning service and get connected to a group. I mean, I love what we do on Sundays. I think what we do on Sundays is so important. It is so beneficial. And for some people, it is their very first step into the life of the church. But what we do on Sunday mornings at all three of our campuses, that is not the ultimate goal for us. That's not how we measure success. The ultimate goal that we have for everybody who's a part of this church is that you will find a place where you can connect with a smaller community of believers. And we believe that's so important, and here's why. Because you can walk in here week after week after week and be completely anonymous and have no one speaking into your life or encouraging you. And I believe you will never be the Christian that God is calling you to be unless you're willing to surround yourself with the right people. You show me your friends, I'll show you your future. And that's why we put a ton of time and effort into helping you get connected into a smaller group, to get out of a row and get into a circle. And I'll be very honest with you. Some of my favorite memories over the past 27 years, some of my favorite memories of being a pastor are memories that revolve around groups that Debbie and I have been a part of. In fact, we're a part of a group right now. Let me just show you the picture of our group. And by the way, all of our group members are part of the Clark Summit campus. So let me just give a big shout out to all of my small group homies there at the Clark Summit campus. We'll see you again soon. We'll be starting up. You'll get an email from me. But this has been our community group that we've been a part of. We started this group in February. And everybody who's a part of the group, they came into the group as strangers. Nobody knew anybody else. But it was amazing in just a few months' time how close these relationships became as we celebrated victories with each other and as we talked about and prayed for the trials that others were facing. And 3 babies were born to families in this group. And it's just been an amazing, amazing experience for us. And Debbie and I were talking about this and said that this has been one of our favorite group experiences ever in our time here in this church. And my wish for you is that you could experience the very same thing. And let me be very, very honest with you. I'm not telling you that we can form a group and put you in it and pray a magic prayer and that you're automatically going to find life-changing relationships. But here's what I've discovered. When people are willing to take that step into community and into a group, that often is the beginning of a pathway that leads them into life-changing relationships. So let me tell you how you can take this next step. There's a card on your seat. I'm going to invite you on every campus to go ahead and pick up that card that was on your seat when you came in today. And by everybody, I mean everybody. So if you have a body and you're here, go ahead and pick that up and take a look at it. If you're just a disembodied spirit floating around, no need to do that. Other than that, go ahead and take that card. I want to point out a couple of things to you. On the front, first of all, there's a place for you to put name, email, and phone number, okay? So you'll want to fill those in at some point. But then on the other side, you see a white side and a green side. And there are 4 very simple ways for you to get connected to a group of people that hopefully will turn into the kinds of relationships that will be life-giving for you. The first option here is starting point. Let me talk about that for a minute. If you're new to Parker Hill Church, and especially if you're new to Christianity, you need to be a part of Starting Point. It's really convenient. It's held on Sunday mornings. It's held at the campus where you attend. And it's a great place for you to ask your questions if you're new to the faith or coming back to church. Great environment to ask a lot of questions, learn the basics, and also find out what it's like to be a part of a group, okay? That's going to be starting very soon. It's 8 weeks long. The second option is to be a part of a community group like Debbie and I are part of that meets in a home in your community. And the way to become part of a community group is to attend Group Link, okay? Now, Group Link is coming up on Monday night, the 28th of September. Now, by attending Group Link, here's what's going to happen. You're going to get some free food, and you'll hear your campus pastor talk a little bit more about what being a part of a group is like. And then there's no obligation, but you will have the opportunity that night to sign up for an 8-week starter group. It's just an 8-week commitment, okay? So you've got Starting Point, you've got community groups, go to Group Link. There's also a men's group. It's already begun, but you can still jump in. The men's group meets at the Dixon City campus and at the Wilkes-Barre campus, 2 campuses, at 6 a.m. on Wednesdays. That's how we separate the men from the boys. There's also a women's group that's going to be starting up very soon. That's a 7-week group, and that's a great opportunity if you want to attend and begin to build some relationships with some other women here at Parker Hill. So here's what I'd love to see you do today. If you're not a part of any group, take out the pen. It's nearby you on that chair. And on both the white side and the green side, check off what you would like to be a part of. If you're ready for Starting Point, check that off on both sides. If you're going to come to Group Link, check that off. Men's group, women's group. But check off both sides because the green side is what you get to keep and the white side is what you're going to turn into us. So this is the day to move beyond good intentions and to actually do something to develop the relationships that you need to have in your life because you show me your friends and I'll show you your future. Okay? So we'll give you a chance. Start filling that out now. We'll give you a chance to turn that in the giving buckets in just a few minutes, but you can go ahead and start working on that. And while you're working on that, let me just address the most common objections we hear whenever we talk about this subject. Here's the first objection. I don't want to get stuck in a group of people where I don't fit. And I get that. But let me tell you this, you'll never be stuck in any group. Any of the groups that you would be committing to today are a short-term commitment, and even if that doesn't work, you're always free to step out again. And actually, it may take a couple group experiences for you to find your people, okay? Number 2, I tried a group once. It didn't go well for me. And I will admit to you that that happens sometimes. But let me ask you a question. Did you ever get a bad haircut? Did you stop going to the barber? Did you ever go to a doctor who wasn't very skilled or didn't have very good bedside manner? Did you then give up on medicine? Of course not. And see, what we're talking about here is not a church program. We're talking about something that's essential for all of us, which is community, which is being in relationship with people on the journey with us. So at some point, you got to pull up your big boy pants and you got to try again, okay? It's too important to give up on. Number 3, I've already got a lot of friends. Okay, and that may be true of you. Let me ask you a question. The last few times that you were with that group of friends, how much of that time was spent in intentional, spiritual conversation? Because this isn't just about friendships, it's about sharpening each other and setting aside a time on your calendar every week or every couple of weeks when we can actually help each other become the people that God is calling us to be. But let me answer this in another way as well by saying this, that everybody needs somebody and somebody needs you. It may be possible that there's somebody in a group that needs you to be there, not for your sake, but for their sake. Have you ever thought about that? Especially if you're like a long-term seasoned Christian. You may have something to share with someone else, maybe by leading a group or maybe just by being in a group. Can you imagine if somebody tells their story someday about their spiritual journey and they say, your name, if it hadn't been for Bob or if it hadn't been for Karen or Jim, I don't know where I'd be. So it's not just about you. Maybe there's somebody in a group somewhere that just needs you to be there. And the 4th very common objection is this, I'm too busy. I don't have time. Let me say this, based on what I've said today, I'd like you to think that you don't have time not to be in a group. Because all the things that are most important to you in life will actually get better if you're surrounded by people who can encourage you and push you in the right direction. We're all busy. Everybody who's in a group right now is very, very busy, I guarantee you that. But we all make time for the things that we believe are most important to us. See, let me say it again. I love what we do on weekends, and what we do on weekends is so important, if for no other reason than at least for my job security, but it is very important. But what we do when we get outside of rows and into circles, I think, is so much more important in many, many ways. And we want to see you experience that. So we're going to give you just a couple more minutes to fill out that card, take that next step. And as you're doing that, as you're finishing up, we want you to hear the stories of 3 people, Charity, Jim, and Larry, who attended a group for their very first time just this past year. And we want you to hear their experience with that. Watch this with me.
Life is definitely better connected. I got into Starting Point because I was starting over with my faith.
I took the next step to pursue groups and get more engaged at Parker Hill from the content that were in the messages earlier in the year. And really it's 2 things that I was striving for. One was just to be a different person. After I assessed who I was, I didn't like who I was, and I wanted to become a better person, and a lot of the content that I've experienced here is helping me with that. And then the second is just to continue my journey and develop my relationship with God.
When I entered into Starting Point, initially I didn't know what to expect, but I found other people that were just like me, looking for answers.
My life has changed in many ways, and the group experience I've had has been a major part in that. As you go around and you relate within the group, tell your story, and then talk through things that are going on during the week, it's a great way to learn more about others, what their struggles are, and to pray together, and also learn more about Bible teaching.
I loved everything about Starting Point. I looked forward to every week.
I had many points where I was writing down my answer, and I was just like, I don't know where this is coming from, but it's coming out, and it's really making a lot of sense.
Like every other experience I have had at Parker Hill, I have met amazing people. People that I didn't think could just genuinely care about me for no other reason but because I'm me.
It took those things that I learned when I was younger, or thought I learned when I was younger, and sort of cleared all that up and basically said, okay, let's wash all this away. Here's the basics. If you can trust him and believe in him, start there, work your way up.
I just came into a new role at work, one that I'm dealing with people that I have dealt with before that maybe I wasn't the best leader in the past. It's changed the way I'm acting at work. I think I'm a better leader today, and a lot of that has to do with me being a better person, feeling better about myself, again, through a lot of what I've experienced here.
Stepping out of my comfort zone was certainly a big task for me, and Starting Point, I think, certainly helped me do that. Take me out of I can take care of this myself, and it's not up to me to take care of.
I think one of the biggest changes from taking the Starting Point group was not being so reserved about living out your faith. I want to be the guy who's like, man, you know what, something's going on with him. I wonder what it is. And then, that makes it even easier to share your faith. If you can be that kind of person, hopefully someday I'll get there. But I'm working on it.
My life has been way better connected. Combining the things that I learned through the messages and then jumping in and connecting. It's the way for me to live what I hear on a Sunday. The biggest takeaway for me is just start, jump in, give it a shot. It works.
Life is better connected.